about God's delivering us or allowing us to be in the hands of oppressors. We don't like the idea of God allowing certain things to happen to us as a result of our rebellion and disobedience. But the fact is that God is a loving God, but he is also a God of justice. And when you repeatedly, when you deliberately go against what you know God is telling you to do, when you are in rebellion, you are also swinging in the wind, subject to whatever oppressors there are. There is certain protection that is afforded for believers who are in obedience. But when you are deliberately in rebellion, you can expect that God will allow certain things to come into your life to bring you back into right relationship with him. In the book of Judges, we see that God continually had compassion on his people. He was continually tender-hearted toward his people, even though they constantly were in waywardness. Even though they were in rebellion, even though they disobeyed, every time the people cried out to the Lord, he raised up a judge who would bring deliverance to them. This is a major theme of this book, that whenever people repented and turned from their evil ways, the Lord always forgave them. Aren't you glad about that? And not only did he forgive them, but he would raise up a spirit-empowered leader to deliver them from their oppressors. That's good news for us, because we fall sometimes. We fall back sometimes. We find ourselves sinning in ways that God has warned us about before. We find ourselves falling back when God says move forward. But whenever God's people cry out to him and repent, he always responds in love. In our text this morning, we are introduced to one of the judges, one of the leaders that God raised up at a time when his people cried out to him. This was one of the leaders that God would use in a mighty way to deliver his people. His name was Gideon. But if we were to judge Gideon based on first impressions, by what we first read of him, we would never believe that he was capable of any significant achievement. You know how they say first impressions are what counts? If we were to judge from this introduction to Gideon, we would not believe that there was any good thing that he could accomplish for God. Verse 11 says, the angel of the Lord came and sat down under the oak in Ophrah that belonged to Joash the Abiezrite, where his son Gideon was threshing wheat in a winepress to keep it from the Midianites. The first thing we notice is that the angel of the Lord met Gideon exactly where he was. There were no trumpets, there was no fanfare, there was no cloud, no lightning, no thunderbolt. The angel of the Lord just came and sat down with him under the oak tree. Here he was on his father's property, under a big tree. And he was threshing wheat in a wine press. Now this is the thing that you have to realize. God meets us where we are. Won't he do that? Hallelujah. Won't he meet you exactly where you are? He doesn't wait for you to get yourself together. He doesn't wait for you to be perfect. He doesn't wait for you to understand everything. He just meets you exactly where you are. If you're sitting under an oak tree, he'll come there. If you're sitting in your car, he'll come there. Sometimes riding along in your car, you can just feel the presence of the Lord. Sometimes when you're at home washing dishes, you just feel his presence and his power. He will come wherever you are. He meets us where we are. But there was a reason that Gideon was where he was. He was threshing wheat, but this was threshing wheat. Wheat was usually threshed or beaten in a flat open space so that the wind, the prevailing wind, could blow away the chaff and the heavier grain would remain on the ground. They would beat the wheat, and the chaff that came out of the beating, the wind would just kind of blow it away. So they needed an open space where the prevailing breeze could come through. But Gideon was threshing wheat in an enclosed place, in a wine press. And the reason he was doing it there was because he was afraid of what the Midianites would do. You see, the Midianites were a nation of nomads that lived in the plains surrounding where he was. And the Midianites had a unique way of oppressing their enemies. They didn't do like everybody else did. While other nations would go in and just ravage a place and kill everybody, the Midianites said, no, we're not going to kill them. We're going to let them work and harvest their crops and gather their valuables, get their food all together and put away, and then we're going to swoop in, take everything they have, take all of their food, everything valuable, and we're going to go on about our business. We're going to let them do the work of harvesting the crops, of bringing in all the grain and the fruit and the vegetables and surrounding the places with their valuables, and then we'll just swoop in and take what they have. The Midianites would wait until Israel had harvested its crops and threshed its wheat, and then they would come in and take everything. They didn't kill the people because they figured they were more valuable alive so that they could continue to provide for them. As a result, the Israelites tried to conceal their crops. They started hiding them in caves and other holes in the ground. But then to make matters worse, another tribe, the Amalekites, began joining the Midianites on these raids. So for 7 years, Israel had been raided. These other nations had just pounced on them like locusts and just taken everything they had. The people were at their wits' end. They couldn't take it anymore. They said, we are harvesting our crops, and every time we turn around, they just come in and take everything. So Gideon was threshing the wheat inside a wine press because he was what? He was afraid that they would take what he had labored for. When the angel of the Lord appeared to Gideon, he said, the Lord is with you, mighty warrior. This would seem to be a strange greeting to a person who had changed his whole work routine out of fear. Mighty warrior? The angel said, the Lord is with you, mighty warrior.